everybody, and welcome to our first month of our Beautiful Day Mystery Quilt Along. This month we're going to focus on a few things to start preparing ourselves for the beginning of block assembly next month. The first thing that we're going to talk about today is going to be starching fabric. This is something that many designers do, many of my customers do, and we've had some questions come up in recent months about fabric starching. And I think that for this project, fabric starching is going to make cutting this panel a little bit easier for me. You may also find that fabric starching, if you're struggling with perfecting your 1/4 inch seam, you may find that starching fabric is a little bit more accurate for you. It kind of removes the wiggle in the fabric when you're rotary cutting and when you're piecing. So it's completely optional. It is not at all required to do, but I thought I would talk about some of the technique that we use to starch fabric. So we're going to come over to the table here. So a couple of products that we have used and can use is in the quilt world. You may know this name maybe from the quilt world more often. Mary Ellen's Best Press it's a starch alternative, just meaning that it's not the same products, it's not made from the same things that the starch out of the can or out of the bottle is made out of. I feel personally, it's great for like removing wrinkles, giving yourself a nice good press, but this is not going to starch your fabric stiff. And what we want for this project and for this technique is stiffness. And so Best Press is not what I would use for this particular technique. We are going to look at using like Niagara in a can, good old liquid starch, okay? And even a product that we carry called Terrio Magic works well. With the liquid starch and or Terrio Magic, we also carry a product called Fabric Booster that works as well. Any of these products we actually prefer to cut with water. We do not use them straight from the bottle for the purpose of rotary cutting and piecing, okay? I prefer to mix it with water, okay? You can use, because we're mixing it down, watering it down, you can use your misting spray bottles. I used an old empty Best Press bottle, and I mix my Terrio Magic 50-50, okay? 50 water, 50 Terrio Magic, so 1 cup of each. The same for the Purex Stay Flow is a 50-50 measurement, but it's really up to you in terms of finding what you like in terms of stiffness. You may find that a 50-50 mixture is too stiff, and then maybe you want to cut it down to like maybe 60-40, with 60% being water and 40% being starch. So I wouldn't like jump out and do a whole gallon. I would start with small amounts until you find the ratios that work best for you. What we're trying to do with this is that it's hard to see, but let's see if I can show you on this camera. This end here has been stiffened and this end here has not. And so when you look at this, if you can kind of tell, this is the non-starched end and this end is that, if I can, this has just got a little bit more body to it than this one, okay? So by having this starched fairly stiff, it's going to make cutting, you can see these squares, okay, are starched, and I can stack them up like a deck of cards, okay? They are stiff, they're not flimsy, they are standing up on their own and not immediately falling over, whereas if I tried to do that with this unstarched stack, they're falling off, okay? So it's up to you. The pro of it is of starching is that you can get some really, really crisp lines. The raveling in fabric doesn't really happen because everything is so secured and stiff. The con is you have to have some time to prep. This is not a just pull it out of the drawer and do it in 5-minute project. You do need to prep your fabric for it, or prep your project. So you're going to take a day and you're going to do all of your starching. When we starch our fabric, you can use the trigger spray bottles if you want. You may find if you're doing large yardage amounts that pulling this trigger can be, tiresome. The mist bottle works as well, but you still have to press and release. You can get, and we'll put a link up for you as well. I've put a link to the Amazon shop that has like a paint sprayer or a bug sprayer, like an outdoor sprayer where you pump in some air and then you can mix up big containers at once. Covers a lot larger of an area. It'll also save your hand. If you're using aerosol cans, there is a trigger system that you can attach to the top of the can to make it like an automatic sprayer for it as well. That won't keep you from having to keep pumping the spray bottles. When you go to starch your fabric, we are going to get our mixture. You want to saturate this. We don't want it to be running full of starch, but we want there to be enough that the fabric can soak it in. I don't want it to be dripping. So I usually will lay out a towel. If you're doing yardage and you have a bathroom or a bathtub that's not being used, or a shower stall, you can hang up your yardage in there, drying racks, things like that. But usually you can just lay out some towels. You may be able to get like an old shower curtain. Today I'm just working on the tabletop with a towel down. So I'm going to spray, and my Material Magic is almost empty. So that's why it's blowing bubbles here. There we go. And I'm just going to spray this until it's kind of sitting on the surface. I can pick this up and it's not dripping full of, it's not sopping wet. And we would let this dry a couple minutes, 20-30 minutes overnight, and it's going to dry stiff. And then once it dries, then you can take the iron to it. A lot of people, if you watch videos and things on it, they starch the front of the fabric and then they iron the back. I don't like to do that while this is wet, because that usually is when flaking happens with starch. So if I went and stuck my iron on this right now, as wet as it is, then you're probably going to see little white flecks that kind of appear. So we let this dry, and then I would iron it from the wrong side. Now I'm using batik here, so there's really no right or wrong in this particular project. And then I can iron it. That way, if there are any flecks or anything that do appear, it's on the wrong side of my fabric and not on the right side of my fabric. So once this is starched, dried, ironed, then you're able to cut. Okay, and we cut just like it. So this is a stack, again, of starched fabric. Okay, it's still pliable. It's not stiff as a board, but it does have a little bit more body than, playing with a stack of unstarched fabric. Also, the thing that starching does, and then ironing once it's starched, is we've wet it. And then when we go to iron it, that's going to kind of pre-shrink your fabric as well. So if you are going to starch, you need to starch everything. That way all your fabrics are pre-shrunk. You want your background, your borders, all of that is good. That's going to go into your quilt top. You need to starch. That way everything is pre-shrunk for you. Okay, so if you are wanting to experiment or try starching, you may want to start on some scrap fabric, give it a try, make a scrap block, sew some squares together, see how you like it before you jump into grabbing all of your fat eighths and your background and your panels. Before you start starching and then decide after one or two this is not for you, then you may want to do some scraps first. We will be working in our project. All of our fabrics will be starched and have been starched. So you can get them all starched while we wait for the next month's block and instructions to appear. You can get your fabric sprayed, dried, and ironed. And then you'll be ready to go when we do start cutting. All right, before we start assembling our blocks next month, I want to test and practice your 1/4 inch seam so that we can be as accurate as possible for this project. So grab a few 2.5 inch squares and your 1/4 inch foot and head on over to the machine so that we can test it out. Now we're going to be using at least 3 2.5 inch squares for this project, for this example, for being able to test and measure our 1/4 inch. I'm using a 1/4 inch presser foot. Okay, so from the center of my needle to the outside edge of this foot is a 1/4 inch. The one big mistake that most people make with 1/4 inch presser feet is that when you are piecing with your 1/4 inch foot, you actually can see some of the fabric to the right of the foot. If you can see fabric to the right of the foot while you're piecing, you're actually stitching larger than a 1/4 inch. Now on the Bernina stitch plate, as well as most other brands, there is a mark right here to the front of the foot that shows 1/4 inch as well. So our goal is to get a true 1/4 inch seam. We have a tool here in the store called the Perfect Piecing Seam Guide, and there is a little hole in there that we take, and you can drop down your needle down into that hole, and let's hit the right button, but drop our needle down into that hole, and we're going to put my foot down, and this is going to show me exactly where 1/4 inch is. And it's hard to tell here, but if I'm looking straight down so once I have dropped the needle down into this ruler and put my foot down, this is showing me exactly where the edge of my 1/4 inch is. It's hard to tell, but there is no yellow ruler sticking out from the right hand side of that foot. If you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, this is also helpful to be able to mark your 1/4 inch, because you can put some tape on your front of your machine. You can use a little stack of Post-it notes to offer you a stitch guide so that you can help maintain and learn exactly where you need to guide your particular piece of fabric. Now that we have our 1/4 inch mark, or have our visual ideas to where we need to follow, we're going to take 2 of our 2.5 inch squares. You're going to place them right sides together. We're going to get it underneath our presser foot, and we're going to sew a seam. Okay, and I already have one sewn. You can take your ruler, you can even take the Perfect Piecer, and you can lay on top and look at where this engraved line falls on your project to see if you actually have a 1/4 inch here. But we've already got one. We're going to open up that unit. We're going to take another 2.5 inch square and put it right sides together, and we're going to sew 1/4 inch down that side. And what we're looking for is, once this is sewn and pressed, and we're going to go press this with our seams to the outside, this strip set should measure 6.5 inches in length. Okay, so I should be able to put my ruler down here on top, and I should have 6.5 inches from this end to this end. If your unit is measuring bigger than 6.5 or smaller than 6.5, we need to make the necessary adjustments to your machine and your stitching until you can get this to measure 6.5. Once you have accomplished and mastered your 1/4 of an inch, you're going to be much happier with the points and overall look of your quilt blocks. Now, if you've decided to starch or not starch, not a problem. We're going to do our first step of prep, and that's going to be to cut our panel into individual 8.5 inch squares. On your panel, there are 24 different motifs in your panel, and we're only going to need 20 for the project. So you've got 4 extra in case you miscut. You can pick and choose your favorites, or maybe the edge of your panel may not give you the exact amount of allowance that you need to get your motif centered. You have plenty to use from. So I'm going to give you a few tips and techniques to get your panel cut into the appropriate 8.5 inch square. Okay, so I'm going to start with this panel here in the bottom corner or upper corner, and we need this to be an 8.5 inch square. Now you can use any 8.5 inch square that you would like. I would not try to do this with a ruler that is larger than 8.5 inches square. You will make a mistake, I promise you. So 8.5 inch squares. I'm going to be using the Creative Grids 8.5 inch square squared up or fussy cut ruler. What we like about this ruler is not only is there an indicator of direct center of an 8.5 inch square, but we have these very easily marked lines so that I can make sure that my ruler is straight. I'm not all being fussed with all these extra markings that I don't really need, because this is 8.5 inches square. This is exactly what I need to lay down, and we're going to be cutting or marking all the way around it. You have about 1/2 inch from the left and right edges of the panel between where they line up. Top and bottom, you may have a little bit more in terms of that, but 1/2 inch is what we are going for the most part. So on this ruler, this is your 8.5 is the outer edge, then we've got 8 1/4, and then we have 8. Okay, so we want to align this with the motif, the edge of the motif here at the first white dotted line. Okay, so that's going to that tells us that we're 1/2 inch from the edge of the ruler. Okay, I'm also going to kind of look in here, and I'm pretty sure that these leaves are really your quadrant center points. Okay, and so I'm going to try to see if I can't get it in a way that these straight lines kind of go dead center or as close to center, because again, you can't guarantee that everything is printed straight, but we're going to try our best to get things where we want them. So I have 1/2 inch here from left to right. I have the same location of the dotted line is falling on the right hand side as it is the left. And then if I look at top and bottom, if I come down to 1/2 inch on one side, the marking, then I'm way longer. So if I come down to the 1/2 inch mark, I'm really far on this side from the necessary 1/2 inch mark. So I'm going to just try to make my left and right markings the same and my top and bottom markings the same. Okay, still going to give us an 8.5 inch square. We don't want to go too far left or right, because then you still need some of this space here to be able to trim this block out. And we don't have enough squares to skip every other block that's in this project. Now, you can jump right to a rotary cutter. So if you want, or if you're not super comfortable, you could mark this with a water-soluble marker, a heat erasable marker, and that way you have your fine lines if you're not super comfortable rotary cutting in multiple directions. You can take your marker. So again, my first dotted line is on left to right, right at the top of the red here, and top and bottom, I have about the same amount of that number 7 line, top and bottom. So that just means I'm even is what I'm looking for. So I'm going to take my marker and I'm just going to mark, just so if my ruler moves or something along that lines, I know exactly where to line myself up. Okay, so now that I have my unit marked, again, I don't have to mark it if I'm comfortable rotary cutting all the way around, but marking it just in case your ruler moves is probably a good little extra step, just to make sure, so that I can get everything lined back up, making sure that my left to right markings are identical and my top and bottom markings are identical. That's going to guarantee that I am centered in my unit. Get that corner, no, maybe not. You could do this, if you do this on the corner of a table, you can get all the way around because you can reposition the your body to be able to get all the corners. And I think I need a new rotary blade in this. So that'll be the next thing. So start your project with a new rotary blade. And then voila, there's my first of 20 8.5-inch squares that I want to cut. I'm going to do it again here for you. Again, I'm going to look at left and right here. So I'm going to line up my first white dotted line here with the edge of my design. And it should match the same point here. And then I'm going to look at top to bottom. If I try to do it this way, things are not 100% straight. So if I look, this part and this part are probably a good place for you to line up your center quadrants here. That will give me that, that will give me that. And then I'm just below that first dashed line there, and I have the same amount at the top corner. So I'm pretty comfortable that if I cut here, because that's running right down between those two leaves, and this is running right down between those two leaves. But I need to fix this, okay? So up here I'm actually missing fabric, so I need to come down some so that I can accommodate for that little bit of missing fabric. You could also use the diagonals. Okay, but I can tell you right now that'll frustrate you because they don't always line up. So the ultimate goal here is just to have the same amount of fabric kind of all the way around from point to point. Okay. Find my rotary cutter again. Here. Okay, that's running through there and that's running through there. Again, you've got plenty of fabric, so if you cut one and decide, nope, don't like it, you just put it in your pile, mark it with a, pin a Post-it note or something to it, and, only use it if absolutely necessary. Okay. And block number 2 is cut. And we'll continue to do this now until you have all I'm going to go ahead and cut all 24 out of my panel, and that way I can pick and choose while we assemble our blocks over the next few months.